This video is sponsored by Skillshare, showbiz, modern art, cooking, dance. These are all ways that human beings express themselves through creativity. There are a million ways to get started on your creative journey, but one of the best ways by far is Skillshare. It's an online learning community with thousands of videos dedicated to starting or deepening your passion, whether it be for acting, editing videos, or drawing works of art. I especially love classes like Productivity for Creatives by Thomas Frank, since they're full of super useful advice for people like me. And every one of Skillshare's growing number of videos are specifically curated for learning only, meaning there are never any ads in the videos themselves. If you're interested in taking that next step for your passion, click that link in the description below. The first 1,000 people to do so will get an entire month of Skillshare for free. And now, on to the video.
Hey everyone, Bandit here. Look at this picture I found of a baby. Isn't it cute, this baby human? Well, guess what? It's 2.5 years old. You know what else is that old? The trailer for Breath of the Wild 2. The one that broke the entire freaking internet and served as a catapult for channels like mine to rise from nothingness on this merciless YouTube algorithm. Released 2.5 years ago. And after all this time, we're still calling it Breath of the Wild 2, or the sequel to Breath of the Wild if you think you're better than everyone. And I think that's pretty weird, and all things considered probably means that the name of the next Zelda game is not only going to be something extremely impactful to the series, but also something that we might already be able to deduce. At least a couple possibilities anyway. And I might be overthinking it, but hey, what else is new? Now, you might be thinking, the fact that we don't know the sequel's name yet isn't that weird, because it isn't the first time Nintendo has announced a sequel to one of their hit games, much less a sequel to a smash hit Zelda game, and it's also not the first time Nintendo has used a code word in the place of their Zelda video game sequel name in order to keep the suspense alive. And you'd be right, because that's exactly what they did with what is perhaps the most famous Zelda sequel, Majora's Mask. Originally, when the first Zelda came out in the ripe year of 1987, the arcade legend's massive success prompted Miyamoto and the crew to come up with a direct sequel to the original. And since it was the second game, it was appropriately announced as and called Zelda 2, with the subtitle The Adventure of Link. Not much suspense here, but fast forward past a couple Zelda games in 1991 and 1993, and eventually we were gifted with The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, the greatest game of all time. In my opinion. Anyway, Ocarina of Time was another huge smash hit, and obviously, following suit with what they did in the wake of Zelda's massive success a decade earlier, they decided once again to make a direct sequel. Only this time they used a code word when announcing the game, for some reason. 1 year after Ocarina of Time was gifted to the world in May of 1999, the Japanese gaming magazine Famitsu declared that Nintendo had another Zelda expansion planned that would utilize the Nintendo 64's 64DD storage expansion, and this mysterious project was code-named Ura Zelda, which roughly translates to The Hidden Zelda, or Zelda Behind. And 1 month later, in June, Nintendo themselves announced that a playable demo of something called Zelda Gaiden would be playable at the Nintendo Space World exhibition in August. Originally, most people and media outlets assumed that Ura Zelda and Zelda Gaiden were one and the same, because of the code names, and the fact that they were announced merely a month apart from one another. But according to some IGN and Game Informer articles from 1999, Miyamoto confirmed in August of 99 that the two were actually separate projects. Then, in March of Y2K, Nintendo officially announced that Zelda Gaiden's actual name was The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask, with Ura Zelda assumedly being eventually released as the Ocarina of Time Master Quest, but that's debatable depending on who you talk to. Anyway, I recapped all of that to say that Nintendo has famously kept sequels of major Zelda games under the wraps of code names before, but with two big differences to what they're doing now with Breath of the Wild 2. In the first place, the official name Majora's Mask was revealed to the public less than a year after it was announced under the code name Zelda Gaiden. Now, it is true that Nintendo was rushing the game for other reasons that I won't go into at this time, but even so, they announced the name of the new Zelda game before the hype began to die down, which unfortunately is a bit of what we're seeing these days with Breath of the Wild sequel since, you know, it's been 2.5 years and all. And Nintendo knows this because this isn't their first rodeo with a sequel in this very game series, so letting the hype die feels deliberate. Which leads me to the second, bigger and more mysterious mysterious difference, which is that they actually did tell us why we don't know the name just yet. In an interview with IGN this year, Nintendo of America's senior marketing manager Bill Trinan said that the name hasn't been announced yet because it would give too much away. And that's it. That's all they said. But see, this is why the lack of a name is so weird to me. Because let me ask you a question. When have you ever bought a Zelda game, or any game for that matter, without knowing the title of said game? And when you knew the title, did it give anything important away about the game itself? I mean, sure, titles like Ocarina of Time kind of spoil the fact that there's an Ocarina of Time in the game, I guess. And a title like Breath of the Wild spoils the fact that Link has no toothbrush to cure his wild breath with. But are either of these, or any of the Zelda titles, actually spoiling anything of significance about the story? Twilight Princess, Minish Cap, the Wand of Gamelon? In each case, we're still left like 99.9% in the dark about what's going to happen in the game, but that's just it. See, since the game itself hasn't been experienced yet, it doesn't matter what the Zelda game is called because you don't know what it relates to yet. Take Majora's Mask for example. Before you play the game, if you read that title, you know that there's a mask that belongs to an individual named Majora, but who's Majora? You don't know. In Skyward Sword, there's a sword pointing towards the sky, but why does that even matter? In literally every Zelda game up until now, because the point of reference for the title is from within the game itself, before you've played the game, you therefore cannot be spoiled, right? So bringing this back to Breath of the Wild 2, since we really don't know much about the game itself, there's only one remaining reason as to why Nintendo would consider the title a spoiler, and that would be if it pertains to something we already know. Logically speaking, that's the only reason they would consider it a spoiler, and be afraid of people reading too much into it. So this begs the question, what is the name about? Well, speaking honestly, there's no way we could possibly nail that down for sure, but I think we can narrow it down to a set number of possibilities based on what little we do know about the sequel. It's true that the vast majority of what we've been shown about the sequel to Breath of the Wild is completely mysterious to all of us so far, but there are some things that we've seen that we can relate to. The first possibility is that it spoils something about the timeline as a whole, namely the end of the timeline. It's no secret that Breath of the Wild's timeline placement has long been debated amongst fans, since it kind of alludes to having taken place in all of the timelines at different points in the game. But one thing is for sure, it is the most futuristic Zelda game on the timeline, meaning it takes place after all the others regardless of which specific timeline it is within. And since this new game is going to be a sequel, not prequel, to Breath of the Wild, logically, it will then be the new most futuristic Zelda game. But that alone is not the spoiler. What would be a spoiler is if it implied that as the latest game in the timeline, it was also the last, which could be assumed for several different reasons. If it were named something like The Legend of Zelda: The End of Time, or The Curse's End, or The Last Battle, or something similar, I could see that giving quite a bit away about the story of the game, or at least just enough so that fans like me would go crazy with theories. The second possibility is that it would imply something about a certain beloved returning villain that we've seen in the game so far, Ganondorf. Think about it, from everything we know about the sequel, the only thing so far that attaches it to the older games, other than Breath of the Wild, is Ganondorf. And we have several reasons to believe that this is going to be possibly his biggest and most notable appearance since Ocarina of Time. Since Ganondorf has been the most recurring villain across the entire series, it makes sense that he's one of the most recognizable Zelda characters of all time. And his appearance in a new game alone is enough to bring levels of hype that you've never seen before. Case in point, the trailer for Breath of the Wild 2. There was not a single shot in that trailer that was revealed to us by accident, and Ganondorf's appearance in both trailers obviously indicates that he's going to be a huge part in the game. Since this is a widely accepted assumption across the fanbase, it would therefore be a spoiler if the title were to reveal something about Ganondorf. Perhaps similarly something about his end or final appearance in the series. Something like the end of the Demon King or Ganon's demise. Ooh, that one has some implications. So anyway, to recap everything I've said in this video, I think the fact that Nintendo has been holding out on revealing the name to us for literally years at this point, and the fact that they said it contains spoilers about the sequel, means that logically it can only be about one of two things: the timeline or Ganondorf. I'm pretty sure that if it were named something about literally anything else in the entire game like Revenge of the Stone Taluses, we'd be completely in the dark. But of course, that's just my theory. What do you guys think? Is the sequel to Breath of the Wild going to be named something that gives away a spoiler about the structure of the Zelda timeline as a whole? Or perhaps even the big man himself? Or is it something else entirely and Nintendo is just holding out on us for the giggles? Let me know in the comments below. Also, thank you so much for watching. Please consider leaving a like below if you liked the video and to get it spread around to another Zelda fan just like you and me. And subscribe if you haven't already for lots of videos to come about your favorite games. That's all I've got for this one, so as always, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. This is MaskedNintendoBandit, looking forward to seeing you next time and signing out. Peace!